great to see such a fantastic crowd here this evening. We're happy to have everyone here. My name is Rich Dwyer. I'm a proud Muscatine resident. I'm a senior vice president of Kent Corporation and proud to serve as president of the board of directors for the Community Foundation of Greater Muscatine. Our purpose is on community building, and what better way than have a community like this here tonight? It's fantastic. We work with so many outstanding, generous donors, both businesses and individuals, who contribute to impactful causes for a lot of people. Causes like community health, education, housing, right here in Muscatine. Tonight is a huge milestone for us. On this day, October 8th, 1999, the Community Foundation was incorporated. We weren't able to celebrate our anniversary and annual meeting in person in 2020, but look out, 2021. We have an incredible evening planned for you tonight. We are humbled and privileged to have Dr. Yong Kim to return to this Muscatine, to his hometown, and present to us, sharing his work, his vision, and few memories from his youth. I'm certain it will bring right as far as the night to remember for all, and especially for him. Dr. Kim's work has served countless lives, improved economies, increased education, impacted global policies, and changed the path of the future, making the impossible possible. That's asking a lot. He's done a lot. I had the opportunity to meet with him yesterday, with Dr. Kim, and I found him to be incredibly humble for someone so accomplished. And not surprisingly, incredibly bright, with a great memory, as you'll see a little bit later, and as you will soon find out, very funny as well. Many of the audience here today knew his family or grew up with him. We're thrilled that you are here. In addition, many guests this evening only know Dr. Kim from the notoriety and impact of his work. We sincerely thank you for being here as well. Joining Dr. Kim here tonight is his sister, Heidi, brother-in-law, if you would, raise your hand, Alex, and niece, Fiona, right down here in the front, as well as his colleague, Shalimar Adorno, down here over on the left. So great to have them all here. Dr. Kim was the class of 1978 Muscatine High School valedictorian, class president, and participated actively in extracurricular activities, including Model UN, basketball, golf, and football. A major part of the fond memories he has of Muscatine includes time spent on the golf course. And today, he returned to his old stopping grounds of Geneva Golf and Country Club to get a few rounds in. As I understand it, it was a competitive day, a little wet this morning, because I know they got wet and I had to go grab his jacket. And someone announced earlier that President Obama said he was jealous of Dr. Kim's golf handicap. Now I know why. He played a phenomenal game out there today. A few comments on the evening. Shortly, we'll invite Dr. Kim to the stage. His speech will be followed by kind of a fireside chat, question and answer with Dr. Kim, led by Dr. Naomi DeWinter, president of Muscatine Community College, and a board member of the Community Foundation. Then we will close the evening with a brief strategic overview of the Community Foundation by our executive director, Charlotte Schaefer. We have some dignitaries in the audience tonight that we'd like to recognize. And please stand if you're around there, but I know we have Senator Mark Lofgren, Mayor Broderson, City Council members. Please all stand up. Any Santos, I know you're here from county supervisors over here. We truly appreciate everybody being here tonight on our special guest as far as for this evening. And now I would like to introduce our Community Foundation of Greater Muscatine Board of Directors, the team, past directors, and investment committee. I'd ask board members to stand as I call your name, and all the others that are listed here, I'll call your names, and stay standing until everyone's been read off, and then we'll congratulate everybody at that time with applause. So first, on our board of directors, we have Bob Barrett, Mayor of Wilton, who I believe was unable to attend this evening. We have Brandon Bullock, President, Hahn Company. Brandon, if you would, stand up, please, over here. Naomi DeWinter, President, Muscatine Community College. Angie Johnson, Executive Director of Unity Point Trinity Muscatine. Angie. Cindy Mays, Market President, Midwest One, West Liberty. Brett Nelson, General Manager of Musco. Keith Porter, President, Stanley Center for Peace and Security. Jody Royal Goodwin, City of Muscatine, Housing and Community Development Director. Jim Stein, Chairman Emeritus, Central Bank Shares. Jessica Suzy, Attorney, Brick Gentry. Mike Wilson, Vice President, First National Bank, Muscatine. I'm going to continue with the current Community Foundation, Greater Muscatine, so still stay standing, if you would, please. An outstanding group of individuals as part of our team. That's a great team that's been put together, headed by Charlotte Schaefer. Charlotte's over here. We have Vivian Jardine. I know she's been in the back running around. There she is. We have Jamie Leza, Lindsay Cruzy, Ciara Yates, Brad Bark, Duncan Snyder, and Hannah Michelson. We also have some past executive directors in the room with us in the audience. Judy Holdorf is here as well. We have Frank Kelly, past director, and Jim Neppel, who provided interim coverage in our history. So Jim is here as well. And finally, our investment committee, headed up by Mel McMains, and Scott Engstead, Bob Jensen, Bob Sheets. I hope everybody's getting, there we go. Jim Stein. Angie Johnson is also on that committee, Mike Wilson, and Dave Jones. Let's give all of them a huge round of applause for what they do. Finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank Bob and Joanne Jensen and Kent Corporation for their commitment and support of today's event. I also want to thank Calvary Church for allowing us to use this beautiful space. With that, we want to turn our attention back to Dr. Kim. Yong Kim, MD, PhD, is Vice Chairman and Partner at Global Infrastructure Partners, a fund that invests in infrastructure projects across several sectors around the world. Kim has served as the 12th president of the World Bank Group. Soon after he assumed that position, the organization established two goals to guide their work: to end extreme poverty by the year 2030, and the second, to boost shared prosperity, focusing on the bottom 40% of the population in developing countries. Pretty tall order. In 2018, the World Bank Group's shareholders approved a historic capital increase for the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which offers sovereign loans to middle-income countries, and the International Finance Corporation, the bank group's private sector arm. The capital increase will allow the bank group to help countries reach their development goals while responding to crises such as climate change, pandemics, frugality, and underinvestment in human capital around the world. The World Bank Group also launched several innovative financial instruments, including facilities to address infrastructure needs, prevent pandemics, and help the millions of people forcibly displaced from their homes by climate shocks, conflict, and violence. The Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility made its first cash grant in 2018 to support frontline Ebola response efforts for the Democratic Republic of Congo. We remember that event that happened. As of January 2019, the bank group is working with the United Nations and leading technology companies to implement the Famine Action Mechanism, which uses technology such as artificial intelligence to detect warning signs early and prevent famines before they even begin. A physician and anthropologist, Kim's career has evolved around health, education, and improving the lives of the poorest and most vulnerable. And he was born in South Korea to parents who had fled the violence of the Korean War and grew up right here in Muscatine, Iowa, where his father was a practicing dentist and his mother was a philosopher and a theologian. Kim graduated from Brown University, then became one of the first students to study jointly for a medical degree from Harvard Medical School and a PhD in anthropology at Harvard University. While at Harvard, Kim co-founded Partners in Health, a nonprofit medical organization that provides health care to poor communities on 4 continents. Bending the Arc, anybody seen it? I hope you have, and if you haven't, you need to go see it. Basically, Kim developed treatment programs for complex, deadly diseases such as multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis, AIDS in the poorest areas of Haiti, Peru, and several other countries. From 2003 to 2005, Kim served as director of the World Health Organization's HIV/AIDS department, and he led the WHO's 3x5 initiative, the first ever global goal for AIDS treatment, which greatly expanded access to antiretroviral medication in developing countries. Following his service at WHO, Kim was chair of the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School, as well as chief of the Division of Global Health Equity at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and director of the Francis Xavier Baghdad Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard School of Public Health. In 2009, he was named the 17th president of Dartmouth College, where he served until he was nominated by President Barack Obama to lead the World Bank Group. Dr. Kim was the first leader of the bank group who did not come from the financial or political sectors, and the first who had personal experience tackling developing issues in poor countries. Kim holds a BA from Brown University, an MD and a PhD in medical anthropology from Harvard University. He received a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, was recognized one of America's 25 best leaders by U.S. News and World Report, and was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential person in the world. With great appreciation and welcome, I give you Dr. Yong Kim.
Rich.
Dr. Kim.
Thanks so much.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to see all of you here today. I thought a lot about how I want to present this to basically my family that I have not seen for 40 years. Right? So I'm going to do something that I absolutely never do. And I almost never show pictures of me with famous people. I almost never do that. But after 40 years away from where I grew up, I'm going to show you a few of those pictures just because I'm going to try to tell a story about how this very improbable life that I've had came to be what it's become. But to start, one of the things that I didn't really appreciate until I actually became president of the World Bank was just how improbable it was for us to get to Muscatine. So this is not my mother, but it could have been. My mother, at the age of 13 years old, had to be evacuated from the city of Seoul because the North Korean soldiers were coming down. And so she literally had to carry her younger sister, who was, I think, 8 or 9 years younger, had to carry her on her back as they boarded a truck that went to the coast and a boat that took them down to an island off the southern tip of Korea to get away from invading North Korean soldiers. Right? So that's the first enormous improbability. My mother was a refugee. My father, at the age of 19, and he was born in 1929, so this was 1948, my father left in the middle of the night, said goodbye to all his family members, and knew a guard on the border of the North and South Korea, which had just recently been divided. And because he knew that guard, he had his high school record, and he was able to get into the southern part of Korea. Somehow, he got into dental school. And in the process of getting into dental school, he learned how to speak English and became a translator for the Korean Army Dental Corps. I just saw my great friend Stephanie Novish, who told me that she became a dentist because of my father, my father passed away in 1987, a long time ago. He was a very young man. But he left his family at the age of 19 and never saw them again. Now, as president of the World Bank, there were all kind of possibilities for me to go back and visit North Korea, because certainly the regime in North Korea knew exactly where all my father's family members were, but I never had that opportunity. Whether I will, I don't know. So these two people, my mother a refugee in the southern part of Korea, my father a refugee from the north coming down, it was so improbable because Korea was so poor. Now this is, and you might not be able to read this, but when I took over at the World Bank, I asked one of my staff members, tell me, what was the World Bank saying about Korea in 1959 when I was born? And this is a brief excerpt. It says, Korea would find it difficult without foreign aid to provide its people with more than the bare necessities of life. Korea was so poor. It was poorer than Nigeria at the time. It was poorer than Somalia. It was so poor that the World Bank refused to give it a loan. And the World Bank gave almost everybody a loan. But the World Bank had written that because the industrial center of the Korean Peninsula was in the north, and because the south was really mostly the agricultural part and the much less educated part, they didn't think that South Korea would have any chance to pay back any of its loans. It didn't get the first loan until 1962. So two people, both refugees, in a country that was so poor that even the World Bank wouldn't provide it a loan. But out of the kindness of Americans, my mother received a scholarship from PEO. How many people know what PEO is, right? She was one of two students. She was a good student. She was one of the top two students in Korea. And PEO gave her a scholarship, and she went to Scarrett College in Nashville, Tennessee. And at the time, there were probably 200-300 Korean students total in the United States. My father got himself into dental school. I don't know how he did it, but he got himself into dental school. He learned English, was a translator for the Korean, and he was translator for the American Army Dental Corps. They liked him, and they gave him a scholarship to study periodontology, which is the science of the supporting structures of the mouth. There were not a single periodontist in Korea at the time, and he got there, and they met in New York through friends. This is their wedding. Okay? Just so, it's unlikelihood on top of unlikelihood on top of serendipity. So they married in New York. My brother Bill was born in New York. And then we went back to Korea. This is a picture of Bill and me with one of our uncles in Korea as we were growing up. So up until the age of 5, and Bill up until the age of 7, didn't speak a word of English, spoke only Korean, and then we came back to the United States when he was 7 and I was 5. All three of us completely forgot our Korean language. Heidi was very young, so she didn't speak much at that time. But Bill was very articulate in Korean. He still to this day doesn't speak any Korean. I went back, and during my PhD, I was determined to learn Korean. So that's what I did. I went, did my PhD, did my studies in Korea, learned how to speak Korean again. But, again, here we were in Korea. Both my parents were teaching in Korea, and it was immediately post-war. It was the late 1950s, early 1960s. And everything was so disorganized. Everything, there were protests every day on the streets that they decided that the most what's the right word? The most compassionate thing they could do for their kids would be to bring them here. So the first place we went is Dallas, Texas. And my father had to do his dental degree from scratch. He had to do it all over again because even though he was a fully trained dentist who'd done a fellowship in New York City, they didn't honor his dental degree in the United States. So he had to go to Baylor and get his dental degree over again. So we did that. And then the first place we moved to was a town called State Center, Iowa. Does anyone know where State Center, Iowa is? Yeah. The rose capital of Iowa, right? About 2,000 people. And we went there because he wasn't sure whether American people would really allow a Korean dentist to put his hands in their mouths. I mean, that was his calculus. He wasn't sure whether they would allow it. So we went to State Center because the dentist there was retiring, and so he knew that he would have patients. Then he developed He was a great clinician. He developed much more confidence. And so we moved to the big town of Muscatine, Iowa. And he began doing what he loved to do, which is teaching at the University of Iowa. Every week, he would spend one day teaching at the University of Iowa. Very, very happy. Now here we are, already with the golf clubs, you see. This is actually Chicago at the home of our cousin. But this was, I think we had just moved to Muscatine right about this time. I moved here when I was in 5th grade, and Bill was in 6th grade. My mother, who's still alive, 87 years old, doing well. This is in our home on 19 Colony Drive. And coming back here and spending time with Gage Kent and Joel Longton and Tim Peters and Doug Holquist, who may be here, we spent much too long on the golf course playing golf, and it was surprising to me how many details I remembered about the specifics of everything from how they swung the golf club to who they had been in love with when they were young, to how they dealt with problems. And those specifics, I realized, oh my God, these things have been burned into my brain, and they must have had an impact on everything I've ever done. And so it was quite a realization today to think, these guys had such a huge impact on my life. All of my friends had such a huge impact on my life. And it's probably something that's going to take me a long time to sort through. But anyway, just put this picture in here to show you that this is my mother. She's doing well. She's still doing her academic work, and now mostly with my brother Bill. Right? Now, this is our basketball team, senior year, right? And basketball was a source of huge encouragement and huge excitement, but also disappointment in many ways. And is Hawk here? Where's Hawk Lawrence? Hawk right there. He was such a star, and I for 40 years I've been waiting to say, if I see Hawk Lawrence again, I'm going to apologize to him for injuring him when we were in 5th grade. And he brought it up right away. He said, "You hurt my leg so bad," right? And it's just these things you remember. Hawk got injured like every other year. So every other year when he wasn't injured, we were great. And every other year when we were injured, we weren't so great. Right? It's true. But, I up until my junior year, I thought, I want to play basketball. And I actually do have one recruitment letter from Central College in Iowa where the coach wanted me to come and play. I still have it to show to my kids who don't believe that anyone would ever have recruited me. But, I show you this picture because in 11th grade, Hawk will remember well, I didn't get to play much, right? And it was devastating for me because, look at me. Come on, an Asian guy, 5'10". I'm not going to be a basketball player for very long. But it was so much part of our identity. And part of it was because we used to play all the time, right? When I first came to Muscatine, I went to Mark's house, and we would play constantly in their backyard. Stan Lawrence, everybody remembers Mark's dad, Stan, was hugely knowledgeable about the game. And all his brothers, Brian, John, the younger brother, they were all, and so that's when I started feeling like I was part of this community, through basketball. And it's the funny thing is it took me till 11th grade to realize that I did not have a future in basketball. But it was an important part of our lives. Golf team, right? So now I show you this because again, this was our senior year, right? So Gage, I don't think I have a Gage is sorry, he's in the 3rd row on the right? Look at that young handsome guy. Jeff Jansen and Tim Peters and I in the front row. Golf, on the other hand, has been a huge part of my life. When I took over Dartmouth, I had almost quit playing golf before I became president of Dartmouth. But then I realized that golf was part of my job. that playing with the alumni was part of what I was supposed to do. And so it was fantastic because the alumni of Dartmouth are members at every great golf club. So I played Augusta, I played Pine Valley, I played everywhere. And I worked at it because it turns out that for the alums, if they get beaten badly by the president of their alma mater, they love it. They love it. Who would have guessed, right? So it's been such an important, and I learned it here at Geneva Country Club, at the Muscatine Municipal. That's where I learned to play golf. And my father used to say, "Hey, play golf. It's going to really benefit you in the future in everything you do." And we thought, "Oh, come on, Dad, what are you talking about?" But that story about President Obama is true. So we were sitting in his office about to go out to the Rose Garden, and that's where they do all the announcements. And he said, this is just this out-of-body experience. It was him, Hillary Clinton, Tim Geithner, David Axelrod, just the whole Obama team. And so he said, "So Jim, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I play a little bit of golf." So he said, "Well, what's your handicap?" I said, 5. He said, 5? Oh my God. And so this was the press conference where he said, Trayvon Martin could have been my son. It was very controversial, right? But because he'd never personalized the violence that some young black people were experiencing. That's when he said it. But he also announced to the world my handicap of 5, right? And then he asked me, he said, "We'll play someday." And so that first summer we played, and I know maybe it was a little racism on his part. He wasn't sure that I would be able to play. And I played well that day, and so I play with him at least once, sometimes twice a year, every year since then. Right? And it's how we've bonded over time. And by the way, President Obama has improved tremendously in golf since that time. Right? So I'm really just working through these thoughts myself of just how much detail I remember about growing up here and how much I didn't really recognize all these years of being out with all these people, how much these experiences have affected me. Dave McLean, Kara Watson, and Mac Hubble. Now, Dave I saw earlier, right? Kara I thought was going to come here, maybe she hasn't. But this was, I think, for student council. I'm not sure, right? But I was always, "Hey, Kara." Was that student council? Okay. So I was always involved in student politics. And I realized that was the foundation of me becoming a politician later, right? I mean, if anyone tells you that being president of a university is not being a politician, they're lying. It's a completely political position. And as I'll show you, I didn't realize it, but being president of the World Bank is being essentially a kind of head of state, but you're a head of many, many states. I'll try to show you how. This was the homecoming court. And I think for the first time in the history of Muscatine High School, something happened at this election for the homecoming king and queen. How many people remember who the homecoming king was? Mark Tate. Tater, where are you? Stand up, Tater. First time an African American was elected homecoming anything in my memory, right? And if I remember correctly, where's Diane Vander Linden? Didn't you make a huge poster that said Mark Tate for homecoming queen? Was it you? Was it Sue Curtis also? All right. So nobody knew who Mark Tate was, right? But they made this huge poster. It was in the cafeteria, and Mark became the homecoming queen, right? Now, King, excuse me. And was it Sue Curtis who was the homecoming queen? Okay, right. I don't know if Sue's here today. But, I look at this picture that in many ways seems silly, right? But with each of these people, I had a very special relationship. And unfortunately, it's cut off. But another person in this picture was Joel De Leon, right? And we were such good friends here. And I think that I learned how to be a friend here in Muscatine. Right? We had the most, what's the right word? We had the most ridiculous nicknames for each other. And we did so many things that were so silly. I mean, Jim Stein I saw the other day, and we grew up next door to Jim's parents. And whenever my parents would go away for, like, my dad would go to a dental meeting, right? We would have the biggest parties. There'd be 50 cars. There'd be 50 cars parked in the driveway. We would be drinking way too much beer. We made so much trouble. But, you know, Jim Stein, across the street, Barbara Schaefnacher, Bill and Barbara Schaefnacher, they never told my parents what we did, right? And having had those experiences and being friends in the way that we were, again, I think it gave me the foundation to do what I did in a way that I hadn't realized. Graduation, and then I just show this because from here, I went to the University of Iowa a year and a half, and then I transferred to Brown University. Fantastic experience. My older son is there now. Great institution, filled my head with a lot of big ideas. And despite spending a lot of time doing basically student council type stuff, I was really involved with student organizations when I was at Brown. I got into Harvard Medical School. And when I went to Harvard Medical School, I realized, I don't know if I really want to do this, right? And all through these years, I remembered what Dale Longton, you know, Joel's here, and Dale Longton and I were very good. Well, he was, you know, my friend's father. But we used to sit down and talk all the time. Dale had big thoughts about lots of different things. And at the dining table, Dale said to me one night, he said, you know, Jim, you're going to go to college, you're going to do well, you're probably going to go to medical school. But I'm just telling you right now, that's not going to be enough for you. And when those opportunities come up that take you beyond medicine, say yes. Right? And so I never forgot that. Unfortunately, Joel has forgotten that, because I reminded him. I've told him 100 times, you know, your dad told me this. And it always came back to my mind. You know, don't be afraid to say yes to something that at first scares you. Anyway, so I got into Harvard Medical School. Wow, you know, it was great. My father was so happy. He bought like 50 Harvard Medical School T-shirts and wore them everywhere. It was so embarrassing. Remember, Heidi? He was so happy. So the good thing was at that point, he was okay with me doing other things, right? And so my first year at Brown, I came back, and it's a true story. My dad picked me up at the airport, you know, the Quad Cities airport. We were driving down 61, and he said, so Jim, what are you thinking of studying? What are you going to do at Brown? I said, well, Dad, I really am interested in philosophy and political science. I think I'm going to become a politician and run for office, right? So on 61, he slowly pulled the car over to the side of the road, right? He looked back at me and he said, hey, and I forget what exactly he called me, but it would have been a very bad word in Korean terms. He said, yeah, I mean, it's just, he said, look, once you finish your residency, you can study anything you want, right? So he told me at that point, okay, fine, it's fine to have all these big thoughts, but get a skill, right? And he'd always say that. He said, you know, he would say things to us like, hey, you're a Chinaman. You think anyone's going to pay you to listen to your ideas about politics and philosophy? And so I have to say, I'm very grateful for him for having said that, because my work is so much different because I took the time to get the skill in medicine first. All right, so in medical school, not sure that it's the right choice for me, and then I found this group of people. And this group of people, this is later on, but it's Todd McCormack, Paul Farmer, Ophelia Dahl, and Tom White. And if you see, this movie was really well done. It's called Bending the Arc. It's on Netflix. And it's the story of how we built this organization. With this group of people, we started an organization, and it was because Paul Farmer, the second from the left, he had started working with Haitian refugees when he was at Duke. And he found that the Haitian refugees, and some of them had become cane workers, they were working in the sugarcane fields, were extremely poor, huge health problems in North Carolina when he was at Duke. But they were coming in large numbers, and he was wondering what on earth is happening in Haiti so that coming to North Carolina to work the sugarcane fields is seen as a step up. So he went to Haiti. He already spoke French at the time, learned to speak Haitian Creole, and began working with a very poor community in the central part of Haiti. The older gentleman there, Tom White, his name is Thomas J. White, and I named my son after him. My son is Thomas J. Kim. Tom was a devoted Catholic. He was the owner of a construction company, and he was the most tortured Catholic I've ever met in my life. The nicest guy, the most generous guy, but he felt so bad about his privilege. Talk about wearing the hair shirt every day, and so he committed to giving away every penny of his money before he died, and he put a lot of that money in us, right? And he said, "Okay, I believe in you guys. Tell me what you want." And so we said, we think we need to think about Haiti. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And so Paul and I were both in the MD PhD program at Harvard. And Paul used to say, "Hey, Jim, the question that we have to ask is, what is the nature of our responsibility given our ridiculously elaborate educational opportunities? What's the nature of our responsibility? What's our nature of our responsibility to the world?" And I had spent all this time in Korea, mostly like working through my identity crisis, learning the language, doing some interesting work. But then he took me to Haiti for the first time. And this is my very first trip to Haiti, right? And I was stunned by the poverty in Haiti. I was just stunned. We were, at the time, working in an area that was so poor that the only way to make any money was to cut down the trees and make charcoal. So when you cut down all the trees, what happens is the topsoil washes away. So not only were these peasants, but they were landless peasants. They didn't own land. And in addition to being landless peasants, the land that was there was mostly eroded away. So people were literally starving to death. And when I went there, the question of what is the nature of our responsibility, given our ridiculously elaborate educations, became clearer in my mind. And I decided, okay, I don't speak Haitian Creole, I don't speak French. I spent all this time learning Korean. Now it's completely useless to me, right? But I thought, all right, I'm going to work with this guy. So we founded the organization Partners in Health in 1988. And I spent some time in Haiti, but I began working in Peru. And so I learned Spanish. And it's one of the things I was looking forward to, coming back and talking to Joel De Leon in Spanish for the first time in 40 years, but he's not here. Anyway, I went to Peru, and we started working in this squatter settlement. It's called Caraballo on the northern cone of Lima, Peru. And I learned to speak Spanish, spent many days and months and hours there trying to figure out what we needed to do. And what happened surprised us, it shocked us. We found families just like this. Now, what this letter says is, I, Juan Crisostomo, admit that I did not take my medicines, and that's why I'm failing tuberculosis treatment. Totally not true, but the medical system forced him to write this letter. Juan in the picture, the young man in the picture, was suffering from multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Tuberculosis that had become resistant to the most powerful, most available drugs. Right? Now, the reason they forced him to write this letter was because it was a huge threat to the healthcare system to admit that it had patients with drug-resistant disease. Because the story at the time, and it was a good story, was that Peru had the best TB control program in all of Latin America, and actually they did. But we kept finding these patients in this community of 100,000 people, Caraballo, northern cone of Lima, patient after patient after patient suffering from drug-resistant disease. And the only way we learned that they had drug resistance is I would fly down there with sputum cups. We would get their sputum early in the morning. I'd get on a plane, fly to Massachusetts, and take that. Whenever I arrived in the evening, I'd take those sputum containers and go right to the Massachusetts State Lab. And because they were friends of ours in the state lab, they did the resistance testing, right? And so the way I told the story was, okay, so if you walk in you land in Peru and you walk through customs, it says no fruit, no animal products, it says, no firearms, but it doesn't say no sputum, right? So we wrapped it up very tightly and we took it there. And the first time we did this, right, we got a call from the Mass State Lab because they said, who is this person? They have resistance to all 5 of the most important drugs. What's going on? And of course, the patient was in Peru, but then we had proof. And we went back and we said to the World Health Organization, to everybody, look, we have patients who are sick with drug-resistant TB. So what we thought was they'd say, thank you. We knew this might be an issue, but we really don't have the resources to do it. Thank you for caring about it. It's not what they said. They said, okay, if you treat a single patient for drug-resistant tuberculosis, we're going to kick you out of the country. Because it was a threat to the storyline, which was we have the greatest TB control program in the country. And so not only did they say it, the head of the World Health Organization said it. They said that that the Peruvians would kick us out of the country. They would write articles and letters saying how crazy we were. You can't do this, it's too expensive. And it was expensive. But what we kept saying is tuberculosis is an airborne infectious disease that keeps spreading unless you treat the people who are sick with it. Now, I tell you this, and when I tell young medical students this, they say, oh, come on, they didn't say that. But they did. Just watch the movie. You'll see they said all those things. And what they said was, it costs too much, it's too complicated, it's not cost effective, to which we would always say, all right, well, so we've treated patients with tuberculosis all over the world, and we've not yet met a patient who came to us and said, doc, don't treat me, I'm just not cost effective. Because what we were seeing was that families were selling their cows, were going into debt to find medicines to treat their family members. And not only that, the family members were infecting each other. We saw these huge outbreaks of families that were getting sick with TB. So this is when I started in a different path. Paul has always loved taking care of patients. He speaks Spanish, he speaks Haitian Creole, he loves taking care of patients. But like Dale Longton said, it wasn't enough for me. I was okay at it, I wasn't great at it. I wanted to do something bigger, so I said, okay, Paul, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna change the policy at WHO. We're gonna fight them every step of the way. We're gonna show them that this has to be done, and we're gonna win this fight, right? And I have to tell you, it felt like I was sort of back, on the basketball court. I was back as a competitor, right? And this is what people have said to me. Jim, when you get into this, it's like you're playing a sport or something, right? And no question, despite the fact that we were 0-56 as a football team, and I know that still hurts Joel when I say, right? Because Joel Longton worked so much harder at getting ready for the football season than any of the rest of us did. We were 0-56, but I think being 0-56 created an even deeper need to compete. And this wasn't competing in that sense, but these guys were telling us things that just were not true. And we felt that we had to win this fight, not just for Juan Crisostomo, but for everyone in the world, because effectively, the WHO had declared a death sentence on everyone in the world who had drug-resistant TB living in a poor country. The primary reason these were the kinds of things that they said, and we'll keep, it's too expensive, it's too complicated, you can't do it. But the real reason was that the prices were too high, right? The prices of the drugs were really high, but they were all off patent. They had not been on patent forever. These were old drugs. And the only reason they were expensive is because only the big pharmaceutical companies in the United States made them, but they were not on patent. And so I asked them, okay, you say that you can't do it because it's too expensive, but have you checked to see whether they're on patent or off patent? And these guys who had declared a death sentence on every person in a developing country with drug-resistant tuberculosis had not bothered to check whether they were on patent or not. And so I said to them at this huge meeting in front of everybody, well, they're off patent, you should have known that. You should not declare a death sentence when you don't even know basic facts. So we lowered the price. We lowered the price of these drugs by 90% just by working with Lilly and Company. By this time they were on board, Lilly and Company, to take the technology and start making these drugs in China and India, right? So first victory, we won that match, and I got a taste for it. I thought, oh my God, look at what we did, right? It's not like it's perfect now, but we literally removed a death sentence from people with this disease living in developing countries. Let me move through this. All right, AIDS, right? So AIDS, again, you probably don't remember what it was like when we didn't have a treatment for AIDS, right? People would waste away. They would look like they were, living dead, and it was the scariest thing. But then in 1996, when we developed highly active antiretroviral drugs, everything changed. And what happened was that the same activists, gay men's health crisis, the same activists that went crazy pushing the government to come up with these new drugs, decided that they were going to help us try to get HIV drugs for poor countries, because it was the exact same story. We said, hey, compared to drug-resistant TB treatment, HIV treatment's easy, right? Let's treat everybody with HIV in developing countries. Let's do it. Oh, and by the way, we know how to lower the price of drugs. We can do all that. 99.99999% of people in the public health world not only disagreed with us, screamed and yelled at us. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to tell us that we should do something that we haven't already done? If it were doable, we would have done it. What are you accusing us of? There was livid anger at us for daring to suggest that the 25 million people in Africa living with HIV shouldn't just be left to die, right? Bill Gates even said at one point, well, HIV, I think we're really talking about the next generation. I don't think we can afford to treat people. I think we're going to just have to focus on prevention. Well, I can tell you that if we had done that, if we had not treated HIV in Africa, the continent could have collapsed economically, right? Nobody was getting tested. They were dying at a very young age. And so we decided, for me, it was, oh my God, exactly the same thing with HIV that we had for TB. We can do this. We can win this fight. And just completely out of the blue, a friend of mine in the global health world, J.W. Lee, a Korean guy, came to me and said, hey, I'm going to run for the Director General, being the head of the World Health Organization. And I said, really? There were lots of other much more famous people running. And so he said, can you help me? So I said, sure. What do you want me to do? I said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I said, well, what if I got a member of the US Congress to write a letter saying that you're the best candidate to become the next Director General? He said, can you do that? I had just met this guy, Sherrod Brown, who was at that time a member of Congress from Ohio, and I had taken him with me to Russia to show him how bad tuberculosis was, and we became really good friends. So I went to Sherrod and I said, Sherrod, I'm going to write a letter, and I want you to circulate it among your friends in the Congress. I want you to get their signatures, and we're going to send this to the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell at the time, and say that J.W. Lee should be the next Director General of WHO. And Sherrod, at the time, we'd become good friends. He said, oh, sure, okay. So he wrote back to me and said, okay, Jim, I wrote the letter, and I got 3 signatures. And I wrote back and said, not enough, right? How many do you need? I said, like 50, and try to get some Republicans too, right? 54 signatures, 9 Republicans, right? And not only did we send it to the Secretary of Health and Human Services and Secretary of State, we sent it to the President of Korea, because the President of Korea wasn't sure that he was going to back JW. Well, JW won. And so all of a sudden, this organization I had been fighting for years and years and years, my man, whose campaign I had run, became the head of the institution, right? So, Kara, doesn't it sound like our student council days, right? So when he took over, he said, well, I want you to join me. I said, only if you'll let me move forward on treating everybody in the world with HIV, right? Now, this story ends up in a much nicer place, because the one man who I think saved the continent of Africa is George W. Bush. Out of the blue, based on these pictures that I'm going to show you, based on the pictures that I'm going to show you that we took, decided that he had to stand up and make sure that people in Africa got treated for HIV. It was stunning, unbelievable. I later have spent time with George W. Bush, and he literally tears up when I tell him about this, I said, you know what you did? He remains a hero in Africa. And these are the pictures we showed. This is Joseph June in March of 2003. He came to the clinic suffering from both tuberculosis and HIV, right? I mean, he looks like he's dead, the walking dead. 3 months later, with mostly some TB treatment, but HIV treatment, this is what he looked like. We put these before and after pictures everywhere, and we took them to the White House, and we went there with Tony Fauci to show to President Bush's team. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that these things could happen right around the corner. So they, at that point, decided, we're going to do this. And so we started this movement, 3x5. And again, you'd expect people to say, oh, you guys you're so idealistic. This is great that you're trying to do this, but we just don't know if it's going to work. That's not what they said. How dare you suggest that something that is doable that we know is not doable? Because if it was doable, we would have done it. What are you accusing us of? That's what we got again. Well, the end of the story is that we went from about 150,000 people being treated in developing countries, mostly in Brazil, to over 1 million by the end of 2005. So we didn't make our target, 3 million by the end of 2005, but everyone was shocked that more than 1 million people were on treatment, and now 27 million people in Africa are on treatment for HIV. So I'm going to fast forward to the rest of it. So then, as soon as we knew that HIV treatment was going, I came back to the United States. And this has been my pattern forever, that I work like crazy when something seems impossible, and when I know that if I don't push, if I don't, bang away, it's not going to happen. But the minute it gets locked in, and it's just mostly a technical, getting the treatment out, I lose interest. Right? So I don't know what that is, ADHD or something. But when the minute I sense that I'm not needed to push this further, I go on to do something else. And maybe this is Dale Longton, speaking in my head. There's more. You can always do more. I came back to Harvard, where I took over running a few departments. And out of the blue, the Dartmouth folks said, "Would you like to be president of Dartmouth?" Right? I'd never been to Dartmouth. I didn't, it's a very famous Ivy League school, but I'd never been there. And through just completely unlikely processes and just, things that I can tell you about maybe at the party afterwards, they offered me the job, right? On that very same day that they offered me the job, Hillary Clinton, and this is the Clintons, that I've worked with both of them now for 20 years. Hillary Clinton called me and asked if I would like to become the head of the United States Agency for International Development, right? And I went to see her, and she said, "I hear you have another job offer." And I said, "Yeah, they offered me the presidency of Dartmouth." And I'd known them, they were almost mentors to me. And she said, "Dartmouth, you mean like the whole thing?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, that's a pretty good offer." So I took that up, but then to go back, 3 years later, I got a call from Tim Geithner, right? Maybe at the discussion, I'm running over, I'm sure. I'll tell you about my first meeting with President Obama. But Tim Geithner, who was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, but also Dartmouth class of '83, he called me out of the blue and said, "Call me back right away." And so the only reason that someone like Tim Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury, would call me is that he had a friend who had a kid who wanted to go to Dartmouth, right? So I had a piece of paper, I was going to write the name down. I said, "Hey, Tim, what's going on? What's the name?" And he said, "Well, would you like to be president of the World Bank?" And this was only after 3 years at Dartmouth, and 3 years is way too short, and I knew that the Dartmouth people would be super angry at me if I left. But I called the head of the board and I said, "Look, they've asked me to come and speak to President Obama about an important position, and it's the President of the United States. I think I should go talk to him," right? And they said, "Okay, but don't take the job." I said, I told them, and I really believed it at the time, there's just no way they're going to offer me the job, so don't worry about it, right? I will tell you the story, right? So I went in, and the first thing they tell you is, we're not going to take you in to see the president unless you promise right now that if we offer it to you, you'll take it, right? That's how they say that they got their first choice, right? Because they basically say, we will offer it to you, but you have to tell us you'll take it first, right? So I said, sure. So I went in to see President Obama, and he's got this unbelievable bearing about him. And he said to me, I sat down, he said, so Jim, why should I nominate you instead of a macroeconomist, right? And so I had been very impressed by this guy, and I was also very impressed to learn that his mother was an anthropologist, right? So I had read her dissertation a few years back, one of the few, because you can only get it from the University of Michigan archives. So I had read her dissertation, so I said right back to him, I said, well, President Obama, have you ever read your mother's dissertation? He said, well, yes, I have, right? I said, well, you'll remember that the economists were all saying that globalization would destroy the Indonesian artisanal industry. And your mother showed that, in fact, globalization led to the explosion of the Indonesian artisanal industry. But, I'm not going to be able to tell you, like the economists, what the world looks like from 30,000 feet. But I have been on the ground doing development work my whole life. I'm going to be able to tell you how things work on the ground. So I get that. Later, literally over martinis, he said to a group of people, hey, Jim, that was one of the best ploys to get a job I've ever seen. Read the president's mother's dissertation. So I became head of the World Bank, and then I'm just going to show you some of the pictures to give you a sense of what that life was like, right? I saw this everywhere, right? The one thing that's so different about today than about any time in the previous times is that everybody knows how everybody else lives. This was not true even 15 or 20 years ago. Everyone has access to a smartphone. Far more people have access to a smartphone than have access to clean water. Everyone knows how everyone else lives. So aspirations everywhere have gone up. So as a kid born in one of the poorest countries in the world, made it to Muscatine, made it to these crazy jobs, I feel like, of course they should have high aspirations. Why not? We should be able to find a way to provide healthcare, education, transport, energy. We should be able to do that. This is a refugee family. I was in Jordan, and this is a Syrian refugee family. And I tell you, I talked to them. Their aspirations for their children are as high as anyone else's, and they were living in makeshift tents at this time. But it didn't lessen in any way their aspirations. So how do you get at this issue of improving people's aspirations? This is, you may recognize him. He's the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Korean guy, right? And he started before I did. We are at the signing of the peace treaty between the Colombian rebels and the government for the first time in history. We're there. And I show you this picture because as head of the UN, he and I work very closely together. He's older than me, and in Korean culture, an older person, if you handle the relationship in just the right way, things go very smoothly. I was always very deferential to him. I always called him Sanbe, which means, sort of my predecessor, my superior, my mentor. And we got along great, and we started beginning to think about how to tackle this question of rising aspirations. We worked very closely all the time that we were there at the United Nations, right? And then to tackle this problem of aspirations, I would go to these meetings. And so this is what's called the family photo, right? Obama, Angela Merkel, there's the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon next to me. The white-haired gentleman is the Prime Minister of Australia, and the gentleman in the bottom, that's the Prime Minister. Well, he was the Prime Minister, now the President of Turkey, President Erdogan, right? And so I would go to these G20 and G7 meetings as basically a head of state, right? I was always in the room with these guys. I got to know them all very well because we were all sitting around a table, and then there would be a lot of downtime. So we'd be talking to each other. And so in my 7th year, I was the second longest serving member of the G20 leaders. So I'd be introducing these folks to each other. Right? The president of Indonesia, I went right away to meet him, President Jokowi, We became good friends, and so when he went to his first G20 meeting, I took him around introducing him to people. Right? This is how it works. If you want to tackle something like meeting everyone's aspirations, you got to do it in settings like this. I show you this picture because it's a very sad thing that Chancellor Merkel is leaving. Chancellor Merkel was one of the most remarkable leaders I've ever met. She's actually a physical chemist, PhD in physical chemistry. And so she tackled every issue like a scientist. She got all the information, and she always acted as if she had a responsibility to take care of everybody, right? Now, it actually hurt her at home, right? It hurt her at home, especially when they took in Syrian refugees, for example. But we worked on lots and lots of things together, and this is a great loss. For the time that I was there, she was the most reliable leader, that if we wanted to try to start something in the world, we'd go to her. This is later. This is Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. And if you follow French politics, he's been going up and down in popularity. But again, a really, really thoughtful, very disciplined and committed guy who's trying to take care of the world. On the other side is the guy who took over for Ban Ki-moon, Antonio Guterres, the new Secretary General of the United Nations, also another wonderful person. So, and these are the kinds of rooms you can't see it, but next to me is Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, a very, very accomplished man. And next to him is Bill Gates. I worked with Bill Gates a lot because there's just so many interests that overlap: global health, climate change, child health, education. And so, these are the people that I worked with sort of every day. I'd be in settings like this, just ridiculously formal settings where I had to give speeches. And this was one at the Élysée, the palace, with President Macron. And this particular meeting was about climate change. President Xi, right? So I've told this story before, but the first time I met President Xi, it was soon after I took over the job. And I started reading about him, and it said, President Xi, when he was a young functionary in the agriculture department, spent a month living in a small town in the Midwest of the United States. Kept reading, and that town was Muscatine, Iowa. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So I went on my first trip to China, and I told people in the finance ministry, I'm from Muscatine, Iowa, right? So it must have filtered back up. Because when I went in to meet him, I said, President Xi, it's a great honor to meet you. We have something in common. He said, I know, you're from Muscatine, Iowa. How are my friends, the Landys in Muscatine? Right? So from then on, I'd say, I actually said this in English to President Xi. So, President Xi, in English, we have a term for our relationship. You're my homeboy, right? And the translators were looking at each other, homeboy? But we joked about this for 6 years, right? And after President Trump was inaugurated, the most encouraging thing that he told, and this was soon after the inauguration, he was so excited because his old friend, Terry Branstad, was named ambassador to China. Things didn't work out so well after that, but we have this unbelievable connection to this town. Queen Rania, they're going through some complications right now, but Queen Rania and King Abdullah were unbelievably generous in accepting refugees from Syria into Jordan, and so we helped them quite a bit. All right, one of my last slides. So this is me with Ivanka Trump. Next to her is Christine Lagarde from IMF, and in the back you'll see President Trump. And you see everyone else who are desperate to get in the picture. The President of Korea, Justin Trudeau of Canada, the Prime Minister of Japan, Australia, the Netherlands, the Prime Minister of England, Angela Merkel. What are all these people doing in this picture? Right? Well, when President Trump took office, we heard through the grapevine that Ivanka was interested in entrepreneurship for women in developing countries. Right? So, me having learned how the world works here in Muscatine, I wasn't stupid. Called her immediately and said, we hear you're interested in women's entrepreneurship. Why don't we get something started? And Chancellor Merkel was running the G20 meeting. Why don't we announce it at the G20 meeting? The only problem was it was April and the G20 meeting was in July. Right? So I said to her, she said, well, how much can you raise? I said, I don't know. We should try to raise as much as we can. And so when all these leaders heard that the new president of the United States, President Trump, had a daughter who was interested in women's entrepreneurship, they started writing checks. Right? And 50 million, 50 million, 50 million, and the money was coming in. And one of these leaders, I won't tell you who, but it's a person I spoke the same language with, called and said, how much do we have to give to be in the picture? Right? So I made up a number. It was a pretty big number. Right? And so there they are in the picture. We raised $500 million in cash, which meant that we would be able to loan to women entrepreneurs close to $5 billion. And we did it in so April we started, by July we had it. And this was at the announcement of this Women's Entrepreneurship Fund. We worked very closely together after that, and having an ally like that in the Trump administration, I think, was critical for us in getting our capital increase, but we got it. Just a few, benefits of being, I still play golf with President Obama at least once or twice a year. Right? He went from an 18 handicap to about an 8, the fastest improving golfer I've ever seen. Right? Still can't hit it out of a sand trap, but getting better. Right? Bono with my wife, Jensuk, right? So I feel like I'm just name dropping, but it's like I'm back with family. I need to tell you about these things, right? So this was at George Soros's wedding, right? George is 88, and his new wife was, I think, 43, but I'd worked with George for years on tuberculosis issues, and so Bono was there, and Bono was one of the people I've worked most closely with. My wife knows Allie, his wife, and we've been able to do lots of things. This guy is for real. I'm telling you, this guy has had such a huge impact. Okay, so you can't see this well, but the guy in the picture is Hugh Jackman, right? Wolverine, right? And those are my nieces and nephews and my son and my younger son in the front, right? And I show you this is because it's the only time my young son Nico ever thought that I was cool. Right? And it got better because the dude who plays the Hulk, what's his name? Mark something, Ruffalo, right? He was also there, and we also took a picture with him. This one was, Hugh Jackman is also for real. He really cares about social justice issues, about educational issues. So I'd known him, and he brought all these kids together. All right, let me finish with this. This is in a classroom in Tanzania. Right? And as I always used to go to a classroom, and I asked these kids, they were 10, 11-year-old kids, I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? 2 kids raised their hand. I said, what do you want to be? President of the World Bank, right? Just like you, the teachers laughed, everyone laughed. Right? And what I said to them was this. I said, when I was, in my earliest schooling, I was born in one of the poorest countries in the world, Korea, right? And I told them that if the president of the World Bank at the time had come to my preschool in war-torn Korea and looked out of that classroom, he never would have guessed that one of his successors was sitting in that room. And so I told them, never let anyone tell you what your limits are. Never let anyone tell you you can't do something. Well, when I was 10 or 11, I was in 5th grade at Grant School. And if the president of the World Bank had come to Grant School, right, when I was 10 or 11, I think it would be even less possible for him to think that this Asian kid sitting in the classroom was going to be one of his successors. So that's the message I want to leave for Muscatine, and especially for young people. There are a lot of young people here, but let's spread this message. Muscatine is a great place to grow up, and it prepares you to tackle the most difficult challenges in the world. Thank you, Muscatine. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
He serves as the chair of the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School, spearheaded a task force for the World Health Organization on global health initiatives, won a MacArthur Genius Grant, and was one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2006. Seriously. We get it. You're smart. Yeah.
Time of my life, and I never felt this way before, and I swear it's the truth, and I owe it all to you. Oh, I had the time of my life. No, I never felt this way before, 'cause I swear it's the truth, and I owe it all to you.
Pleasure to welcome you back to Muscatine. And I feel like we should either sing or dance.
No. That last thing at Dartmouth, it was part of something called Dartmouth Idol, right? And I had to practice for a month to get that, right? Because the people who were in the contest, the director, he was actually the director of the gospel choir, just brilliant guy. He would say, okay, and shuffle, twist, turn, and then they would all do it, right? I had no idea what they were talking about. It took me a month with auto-tune to get that.
Well, you took us on a wonderful journey of your life, starting in Muscatine, going to University of Iowa, Brown, Harvard, Haiti, Peru, Dartmouth, and then the president of the World Bank. What are you currently working on, and how have you tied all of those steps in together?
So it really gets to this issue of aspirations. I mean, I'm very worried about it. I'm very, because there's so many crises that are happening, pandemic, climate change, all of these things that are happening. I think this is the worst one, that the most frightening one, where you have young people who, again, can see on their smartphones how other people are living, and who can see that just strictly by the accident of their birth, their opportunities are completely cut off. And so this is going to lead to, I think, instability, could lead to violence, and it's something we can fix. And I came to the conclusion that, it used to be that there was so much money in the World Bank, in the various, aid groups, USAID, DFID, the groups that give money as aid. And it used to be even more than the countries could absorb, but not anymore. There's nowhere near enough money to build roads, to provide energy, to provide digital. I mean, 20 years ago, we weren't even thinking about digital infrastructure in these countries, but if they don't have it, it's impossible. If they don't have cell towers, if they don't have data centers, it's going to be very difficult for them to grow in the way that they want to. So I looked around, and it was clear to me that the only path forward was to have the private sector invest a lot more. And it was clear to me and to people that I was working with that there are win-win situations where investors could make a good return while at the same time providing really critical infrastructure. But it just wasn't happening. I was hosting meeting after meeting after meeting, and they all say, oh yeah, Jim, we're with you, we're gonna do it, and they just wouldn't. And part of it is because they didn't know these places well. They didn't know how to reduce their risk, how to manage complex projects in these countries. And the team that we have now, one of my main partner is a guy who was the first person I hired at the World Bank to run our private sector group. Brilliant guy. And between us, we know these countries so well. and they trust us. I mean, we were not coming to them to try to make money. We were coming to them to try to help them with their development. And now they all understand that without private sector money, they're never going to be able to make it. So it's at last count, I've had 6 completely different jobs, right? And each time I've had to spend lots and lots of time learning new things. Like, I had to learn Korean, and I had to learn anthropology. I had to learn Spanish. I had to become a specialist in tuberculosis and HIV. I had to become I had to learn about academic administration. I'd never run anything like a university before. At the World Bank, I had to learn about so many different sectors, and I kind of came to realize that. I just thank my teachers here in Muscatine. I somehow emerged from here being kind of fearless about learning new things, right? And I also kind of don't feel really alive unless I'm banging my head against something new, right? So the thing I had to learn for this new job was valuation, how you value companies, how you read, balance sheets and income statements and all the stuff that people in finance do all the time, but I'd never done it, right? And so I kept asking my partners, what do I need to do? Don't worry, just go and shake hands. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be the relationship guy who was there just as a figurehead. So I said, come on, tell me, what am I going to do? What do you want me to do? And so finally, one of the staff members said, well, all the new people who come here, they take this course, right? Where they are put through valuation boot camp. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. So I did it. I went back and talked to my partners, told them I did it. They said, what? And I said, and you knew that I needed to know this. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me to do this? And they said, well, because we didn't think you'd do it. So why didn't you think I'd do it? They said, because we know we wouldn't have done it. So, it's become a pattern now. And I still have so much to learn. This is going to take, probably the better part of a decade to get there. But what I've learned is that having dug so deeply into all these different issues, being in a situation where you feel like, oh my God, I don't know what people are talking about. This is so threatening. This is so new. What am I going to do? That's actually the moment when I feel most alive. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So earlier today, you talked about being impressed with seeing Muscatine in the condition that it's in. You've been away for some time, and there are so many jewels to witness. And I remember you said that you can tell that Muscatine cares about Muscatine, and I think you were talking about some of the industry that contribute to the success of Muscatine, and also some private citizens.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, even in your presentation tonight, Dr. Kim, a private citizen named Thomas J. White, and he was an early benefactor of your work. We'd like to hear more about the importance of having someone like him on your team and the ability to go to him when you needed to get things started.
Absolutely. There's a reason I named my first child after him. I'd never met anyone like that, right? But, after seeing what's happened in Muscatine's got a couple of folks like that. Not more than a couple, right? And look, I'm probably not supposed to call them out, but people like Gage Kent, Jim Stein, Stan Howe when he was here. These are just giants, carvers, right? And I don't want to miss anybody, but very few communities have multiple people like that who are ready to step in and support the community. That's what a community needs, right? But, the one question is, how does Muscatine answer the question that Paul Farmer and I asked ourselves, right? So with support like what we have here, what's the nature of your responsibility to not only Muscatine, but to the rest of the world? I think it's a question you can ask now. I think it's a question that this is an extremely well cared for city. Heidi remembers, my sister Heidi remembers that there was a 60-minute show at some point that said that Muscatine had the lowest unemployment rate of any city in the United States or something like that, right? This is a very special place. And I think it's asked itself really good questions about, I know there's a new STEM center at the high school. Hey, come on, high schools don't have STEM centers, right? Most colleges don't have that. That's great. But then with that, what's the nature of Muscatine's responsibility now to the world? I can't answer that for Muscatine. I hope that people will feel that I'm doing some of that stuff, that as a son of Muscatine, that I'm trying to live out some of that responsibility to the world. But I think it's a good question for people to ask themselves.
You've said there's a lot of Muscatine in what I do today. Can you paint a picture more of how growing up here in Muscatine shaped you? You've mentioned some themes already. The 0 to, what was your football record?
0 and 56, right, Joel? Something like that. And then they, if I remember correctly, they won a game, the third game of the next season, right? Fairfield, Iowa. And they went nuts. I remember they went nuts. Mark Rohde was the quarterback, right? Yeah. It's just the little facts, right? How would I remember after all that I did, that it was Mark Rohde that was the quarterback? I think that what I realized coming here today was that when people ask me that question, I didn't think about it in the right way. I was thinking about maybe personal experience, specific experiences or groups, or it wasn't that. It was about the relationships, right? And it was about the depth of the relationships that we had as friends. And so many. I'm overwhelmed. There's so many friends here, and I realized that I remember very intimate details about everything from their saddest moments to their greatest moments, to who they were in love with in high school, that they have forgotten themselves, right? But that I kept somewhere in my mind, and it was there as a way of judging so many things that were happening in my life. My frame of reference is still Muscatine in so many ways, because they were such profound and important relationships for me. Right? It was amazing just to be out there with old friends. That's what it was. It's the relationships, and you can't. You could write a book on each one. So there's no simple, straightforward answer, but just all of the experiences that we had. That's now. Even now I'm seeing how it affected the way I dealt with all of these issues that I'd taken on. Some people have said, when you take on a fight like HIV or TB, it seems as if you got like a chip on your shoulder, not about you personally, but about winning, right? And now I realize, well, maybe it's because we were 0-56 as a football team. So, Joel, can I say the story about what happened afterwards, right? So, and Joel had forgotten this, right? So during the, it was just before we graduated, right? And I was having another one of those parties that Jim Stein's parents didn't tell my parents about, right? And we were sitting there, we were feeling pretty good, and we were sitting in my living room, and we were talking about all the things that had happened in high school, right? And we started talking about football, and Joel started weeping. He completely forgot about this, right? And so my memory of it was, oh my God, Joel shouldn't be weeping. He worked twice as hard as any of us in preparing for the football season, right? We should be apologizing to Joel for not having worked hard enough. But that's how much he cared about something that seems silly at some point, but it wasn't, right? It was a source of huge pride for him. And so I remember thinking, wow, I need to care about things as much as that guy cared about something, that again, the rest of us just didn't contribute enough to. Right? Anyway, Joel. It's so I realize that these things are sort of dug back in there somewhere, and it just all started coming out today. Right? He didn't remember.
Yeah. And football is a team sport, so
Absolutely.
it took all of you to care that deeply.
Well, Rocky Johnston is here. Where's Rock? All right. Do you remember when we won our first game as sophomores?
I scored the first touchdown.
You scored and you rang the Liberty Bell, the victory bell. Do you remember? You rang the victory bell, right? So just this, these images in my mind, and I still remember when we won 3 games, I think, as sophomores, right, in football. They were some of the most unbelievable experiences. We were just, having, 50 guys who had worked and worked and worked and had a victory like that. I still tell people, there's something really great, different about football, winning a football game, right? So, again, it's the relationships. It's the relationships that really matter. I don't remember that you scored the first touchdown, Rock, but we'll go with it, all right?
In the documentary, I remember the moments where you and your friends presented some positive evidence, some positive data about what was working in Haiti and what was working with Ebola and other things that you were working on, and you were greeted with, a firm no. And you've said before that you like to change people's sense of what is possible. So my question related to those moments is, did you try to change the sense of what is possible for them?
Not for them,
Yep.
right? So, one of the things that we learned in anthropology, right? One of my professors, Arthur Kleinman, used to say, look, anthropology is pretty straightforward. You have to understand what's at stake for people. Right? And so for the people who were so angry at us, what was at stake for them was their reputation as people who had been against treating, right? So it was completely different what was at stake. They were not going to say, oh, thank you so much for showing me that I was wrong all these years, right? Experienced professionals like that, they had a stake in saying that it was not possible to do it, right? So those weren't the people who we were inspired. Mostly it was our students, it was our young people, right? And so that's what a lot of people have said to me, people who've gone through my classes and students, that I gave them a sense that something that better was possible. But it's because they're students, right? And the funny thing is, all the people who said it's impossible to treat HIV in Africa are now running around the world saying, oh yeah, I was always for treating HIV in Africa. They've completely rewritten history, and you know what? It's fine. I don't correct them because it's sort of, I feel like, okay, it's great that you're on board at least now, but I can tell you that when I'm in the room, they're much less hesitant to make those kinds of claims because we knew exactly what happened, and I don't mean to lord it over them, I don't remind them of this, but I have to remind the world that that's actually what happened, and so. When people look at this, well, how could they have done that? That was so terrible. What I always say to the young students is, okay, look, the point is not to look back in history and say, oh, those people were so terrible, right? The point is to ask ourselves, what are we doing now that in 20 years, young people are going to say, oh my God, can you believe they did that, right? That's the harder question. And I hope that that's the question that I keep asking myself. And for me right now, it's, how is it possible to think that in this day and age, people will still not have access to electricity, not have access to, clean water? I think that's one of the things that young people in 20 years will be asking us. So that's why I'm working on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've spent your life and career working on issues of extreme poverty, and improved economic and health conditions for the poorest of the poor. How can you relate some of your learning to the rural community in which we live?
Yeah, I don't know much about what's happening with the economy in Iowa, But I know, I was very involved in pandemic response in Massachusetts and Ohio. I advised the governors in those places, and I know that in every state there have been people who've been devastated by the pandemic. Now, I don't have a good answer for that. I just know that the complexity in agriculture, for example, in a place like Africa, is changing because land that is desert and land that is arable is changing very quickly, right? So, it's why I had enjoyed so much talking to Gage today about what they're doing in terms of providing food, because this is going to be a major challenge going forward. And so I hope that what happens is that Iowa and the farm communities in Iowa continue to thrive. But I'm not an expert on it. I don't know if I can tell you much more than that.
Okay.
Should we take questions from the audience? Does anyone have questions in the audience? We hadn't planned for that.
Yep.
Okay. The question was, what I think about the role of technology in solving problems. So let me just give you an example. During COVID, right? I can't tell you how many people came to me and said, "I've got the app that will solve the problem," right? And very few apps solved the problem of COVID, right? There was still a ton of person work that needed to happen, right? So we built a contact tracing program in Massachusetts, and there's just so many people, sending me their research, the notion of an app. So I'd say this: technology is incredibly important. I mean, what we've learned about what's possible over Zoom, over video conference, I think it's changed. I think there's so much more that's possible. I think the possibility of extending the reach of educational institutions is much, much, much better. But I've just had spent too much time waiting and watching as somebody's laptop crashes as they're trying to show me their app that they think is going to solve every problem, right? Apps can solve problems, certain ones, right? But if you're an app looking for a problem to solve, it's very different from having a problem that you need to find a way to solve one way or the other. Sometimes an app can help, but I have to tell you, this time around, apps, contact tracing apps that tell you how far away you are from others, it worked in some very limited settings, but not in others. So bottom line for me is, absolutely, the technology can have a huge impact, and we have to make sure it has a huge impact. But to get to a point from having a really interesting app or a really interesting intervention or interesting technology to actually making it work to help do things like end poverty in the world, there are many, many steps in between, right? I'm really interested in technology. I love technology, so I tend to be a sucker for looking at these things. But it's the real knotty, difficult problems of the world will not be solved, I don't think, by simple apps, right? Yeah. I think we have a microphone here, right up in front. Yeah. Tell me your name too.
I live right across. I live right across from where you grew up on Colony Drive.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I love that big oak tree in the backyard. I bet
Is that the
climbed it.
Schaefnackers? The Schaefnackers' old
No,
house?
across the street. And down a dentist lived in my house. I don't know.
Was that us? What's your address?
No. In my house that I live in, across where you used to live, a dentist lived there. I bought it from him.
What's your address?
Mine's 24.
24. Okay.
I'm inside that circle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't follow politics very much, but you said something that made me curious. How you helped Trump's daughter raise $1 billion, $1 billion or whatever it was, for some sort of thing to help the world. And did anything become of that? Did she spend the money wisely? Do you know where it went?
She didn't spend it. No. So she was kind of the sponsor of it. But then the minute we raised it, it went into being the regular channels of the World Bank. I mean, it became controversial. People who hated the Trumps accused us of all kinds of terrible things that didn't happen. So what she did essentially was help us to raise the money. And then she actually provided direct mentoring to some of the women entrepreneurs. She herself was an entrepreneur. So she really put her sweat equity and time into it. And it's, I think now we're at $5 billion. So if you have $500 million, what you do is you can essentially buy down the interest of funds that you raise just on the markets, right? So if the World Bank goes out and says, okay, we're going to raise a bond, we need $5 billion, and we'll pay you 2.5% over 10 years, right? So we can raise that money anytime because we have lots of capital in the bank. So we raise $5 billion. And then what we do with the 500 million is essentially reduce the interest rate. Instead of charging the 2.5% or whatever, we can charge 0.5%, because that money reduces the amount of interest these women entrepreneurs have to pay. So if you're a woman entrepreneur in Morocco or in Africa, you can't get money to begin with. So if you can get $10,000 or $20,000 at 0.5% interest, that's a complete game changer. So that's what we did. And so she wasn't making any decisions. She wasn't deciding who gets the money. We had a whole elaborate process where we decide who gets the money. And the last I heard, the program's working really well. Yeah.
Hi, Angela Weck. I drove over from Peoria, Illinois.
Wow.
I'm with the Peoria Area World Affairs Council. And you are clearly proof that one person can make a difference in the world, not just in your neighborhood or your community, but in the world in general. What advice would you give young people and old if we want to try to make a difference in the world for all?
Well, so let me just tell you a quick story, right? So Paul Farmer, if you see this movie, right, you'll see that Paul Farmer is one of the most extraordinary human beings that ever walked the earth, right? He's the most brilliant, medical doctor, clinician. He knows everything. He has incredible patience, and he can sit in a clinic and take care of patient after patient after patient for days, weeks on end, right? And so young people see this movie, and they come and they say to me, I want to be just like Paul. Can you help me be just like Paul, right? I say to them, all right, I've probably seen 1,000 young people who tell me they want to be just like Paul, and not a single one has become just like Paul. And a whole bunch of them have become miserable trying to be just like Paul, right? And so I try to, first of all, release them from the guilt and the sense that they have to become like another person who does this, right? And so the first thing I say to them is, look, I really want to help you to try to be effective in the world, right? But you have to be honest with yourself. What are the things that make you happy, right? And they would say, yeah, I want to be just like Paul. I want to go to Haiti. I said, okay, these are people who are living in poverty, right? And the one thing I will not do is subject them to unhappy Americans who are down there pretending like they're helping but when they're really miserable. It happens all the time, right? So there's so much poverty in the world. There's not like a long line of people who you have to wait in order to tackle poverty. The most important thing is to find the things that you like to do anyway, right? Things that make you happy, the things that give you joy. I sound like Marie Kondo. What gives you joy among the clothes? But there's some truth to that, right? You need to find the things that you can do. You can't do it by thinking, I need to be like that person, right? And there's been so many different ways that people have made a difference in the world. Find the way that resonates with you, that doesn't make you miserable, but makes you happy. I mean, this was hard for me. I thought, I may be, I don't think, I'm not the closest, but I came fairly close to being able to do what Paul does, but I couldn't do it. I mean, I just couldn't sit in the clinic every day and take care of Haitians. And first of all, I felt like I wasn't very good at it. And I just didn't like it. And so Paul and I had this 2-day meeting where we just talked it all out. And Paul said, Jim, come on, do what you love to do. And that's when I started getting into the policy part of it, right? So the MDR-TB, at first I started out treating patients, but again, I didn't feel like that was the thing that I did best. And then I started focusing on changing policy at WHO. And then I found I was pretty good at that, right? So you have to give yourself room to find what it is that not only lives up to your ideals of what you think you should do, but also make you feel great.
Let's go with one more question, if we would.
Yep.
First off, thank you for coming back and remembering your roots. As an immigrant, do you have any advice, both for the U.S. and for other countries around the world, to improve or to lessen the pull and the push that immigration has, the forces of poverty that push people, and neither party in the U.S. can solve this problem? Do you have any good suggestions?
Oh boy, that's it's hard. It's a hard one. I mean, I talk a lot about Chancellor Merkel, and she accepted 1 million Syrian refugees. Right? They weren't just Syrians. They were from all over the place, and it had a huge negative impact on her political popularity. Right? But I talked to her a lot as she was doing it, and she said, look, it's just the right thing to do. And she was really interested in talking to me because the World Bank was by far the largest supporter of Lebanon and Jordan, where the vast majority of the refugees were going. And she kept after me because she was saying, we can't handle another 1 million refugees in Germany. The German economy. Well, it's not true that the German economy would fall apart. It wouldn't fall apart as much as the Jordanian economy was falling apart. But it's true that it would have just caused fundamental shifts in German social life, right? And so she understood that, therefore, what we had to do was to try to build up their home countries. We had to try to build back the economy. But how do you do that in Syria, when the head of state is using chemical weapons on his own people, right? There was, and being supported by powerful countries outside of Syria. So the situation in Syria was so bad, we didn't know what to do there, right? But what we then did, with her support, was we really ramped up our programs in Lebanon and Jordan, supporting the Syrian refugees there, so that they would feel that it made more sense for them to stay there, where they shared a language with everybody, they were more familiar with the territory, and not go to Germany, right? And so here's this most generous leader in all of Europe in terms of accepting refugees, but also saying that if we get another 1 million, German social fabric will fall apart. So it's hard. It's really, really hard. And it's partly why we're running around trying to build infrastructure in these developing countries. What if you get a European leader over a beer or two, they'll tell you that their fear is that if poverty gets so bad in North Africa, or even sub-Saharan Africa, anywhere, Southern Africa, that they're going to start moving into Europe, right? And if that happens, they've already had a sense of it, right? So, people ask the question all the time, well, why should we provide aid? I tell you, the Europeans now understand exactly, after this experience of the refugees, they understand exactly why you provide aid to those countries, right? Because it's just a reality. People have high aspirations. People want what everyone else has. And I think it's possible. If you had electricity, access to the internet, water, clean water, I think the vast, vast majority of people would prefer to stay in their own countries, where they have their families, where they have opportunity, where they have, where they know the language, right? I think they would prefer that. But I don't think there's enough sense of urgency for making those kinds of investments. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. You've stayed for a long time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich, thank you. Thanks, Rich. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
He's just read us.
Mic on? There we go. So inspiring. Thank you again, Dr. Kim. Fantastic, and what a wonderful, insightful presentation and delivery. And also to Dr. DeWinter, thank you so much. We can all learn from all of it, all the comments that he's made. It's truly possible to make the impossible come true. Relentless pursuit and focused aiming can make and change the future. We're grateful for your words and your work. We're grateful for your time and tenacity, Dr. Kim. We're grateful that you choose courage over comfort throughout your career. And we do have a few projects going into Muscatine, so when you're ready, we want to recruit you for fundraising. Would be fantastic. So we're all for that. I do want to invite up here Charlotte Schaefer, the Executive Director of the Community Foundation, to close out the evening. Charlotte?
Thanks, Rich.
Yep.
Thanks. Oh, Naomi, thank you. We appreciate it. And Rich, we appreciate your comments. But Dr. Kim, we're inspired by both your work and your words. You know, it's been quite a bit of time coming to get you guys here because we had to schedule and reschedule, and they've worked diligently for Dr. Kim to come back to Muscatine and share what he shared this evening. I think the thing, to hear you is moving, because to hear one of the most powerful people in the world whose focus is improving the lives of the least powerful, there's no words for that. And we salute you, and we encourage you. I often say people try to change the world with their opinion. But change doesn't happen with words, it happens with action. And Dr. Kim and Shalimar and their team are an illustrative example of that. You and your team have been relentless and unwavering in your pursuit. And because of that, you've made the impossible possible, and we're thankful. I read once there's two kinds of people. There's those that sit and talk, and there's the dancers that listen and move. And Dr. Kim is, in fact, a dancer. You know, I'm thankful you see the people and the opportunities, and you don't have patience, because if you did, lives would be lost. I wear a watch that says, now is a good time, because it reminds me that children can't wait. People can't wait. Our community can't wait. It's our responsibility, and we have to come together collectively because we have the power to do so, to think upstream, just as Dr. Kim has. So I thank you, and I thank Shalimar for believing in a better future, for dancing and improving lives, improving communities, and improving nations. As well as, and I think this is the important point, enlivening the moral compass to allow us all to have a path to follow. We're very, very grateful. With that, I want to thank all of you. It's been an incredible journey for the Community Foundation. We continue to be able to grow and have impact only thanks to the donors and the nonprofits and the volunteers that do the work. You're all dancers. So we're thankful for the dancers we have in the community that continues to keep our community growing and strong and giving a place for our children to grow up, just like Dr. Kim had, that can enliven their spirits. So with that, we want to let you know that we've got some things going on after this event. So there's a class reunion, class of 1978, but also old friends. So if you knew Dr. Kim, you're welcome to come to that as well. I'm starting to believe it may not be as much like craziness as happened on Colony Drive with some of the parties you had. But we're going to do our best to have a really great party. And it actually starts shortly. It'll start at 8 and go till midnight. It's going to be at the Merrill. We have information at the information desk. So if you, in fact, did know Dr. Kim and didn't realize this was going on tonight, you're welcome to join. If you are part of class of 1978, I think you need to go, because otherwise Dr. Kim's going to tell stories the way he remembers them, and you're not going to be there to be able to defend yourself. So we certainly hope that you'll be able to join. I understand that if you'd like to stick around and you see people that you know and you haven't seen for a while, because we're getting a chance to somewhat be back together, there's still refreshments out in the main area, and you're welcome to join us for that as well. We thank all of you for being part of our community. We've got a lot of information in the book about what the Community Foundation's done, and we don't do that alone. We've got an amazing team. I'm thankful to the team. Good fortune happened when our team agreed to join us. They do amazing work. But that work doesn't happen without the donors and the volunteers and the nonprofits working alongside of us and every single day and doing it with impatience. So thank you for giving us a path to follow. With that, I wish you all well. I thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.